Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Mild History. Before we begin tonight's journey, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Perhaps you are curled up in a quiet bedroom, perhaps traveling on a dimly lit bus, or sitting in the stillness of a late evening. Wherever you are, I'm grateful that you've chosen to spend this time here. Settle in now and let the sounds of the 18th century gently surround you. Tonight, we do not focus on the tumult of history, but on its quiet, persistent beginnings, the slow, almost accidental origins of a substance that would, through the simple application of time and water, become an enduring symbol. We are traveling back, far back, to the damp green heart of Ireland, to the time when a man named Arthur Guinness first drew breath. Our starting point is the 1720s in County Kildare, a county southwest of Dublin. Picture the scene with a quiet clarity. This is a land defined by water and mist. It is a topography of low, rolling hills, vast stretches of wet, intensely green pasture, and fields marked by rough stone walls and hedges thick with hawthorn. The air, perpetually cool and moist, carries the scent of peat smoke and freshly turned earth. Transportation moves at the pace of the horse and cart, the wheels slowly turning, sinking slightly into the heavy clay paths that connect small villages and sprawling Protestant estates. Arthur Guinness was born into this environment, a world where social mobility was severely restricted and religious lines were strictly drawn. His father, Richard Guinness, held a position of modest respect. He was the land steward for Dr. Arthur Price, who was then the Archbishop of Cashel. This connection to the church and to the land provided the young Arthur with two key things: a measure of security above the common peasant, and an early, quiet lesson in practical, long-term management. Managing an estate in 18th century Ireland was a lesson in logistics, inventory, and the endless patience required to deal with the slow, unpredictable rhythm of the agricultural cycle. Life itself in this period was a cautious affair, deeply tethered to the uncertainty of basic hygiene. Clean drinking water was a perpetual, profound risk. The simple act of quenching thirst could introduce debilitating, often fatal diseases. This necessity, the need for a safe, hydrating liquid, is the humble, quiet origin of all brewing. In the small alehouses and farm breweries of 18th century Ireland, beer was brewed primarily because the process of boiling the water during the mash and fermentation stages made the final liquid exponentially safer than consuming water directly from a stream or well. The resulting drink, often a weak, thin ale or small beer, was low in alcohol, just enough to act as a mild preservative, but high in the necessary calories to sustain the laboring body. It was a daily, functional necessity, not an indulgence. The atmosphere in these small, local alehouses was one of quiet, tired necessity. The clink of thick ceramic mugs, the low murmur of conversation, the persistent, slightly sour smell of yeast and stale malt. Arthur's early exposure to the mechanics of brewing came through a quiet legacy. His godfather, Archbishop Price, upon his death, bequeathed a modest sum, around £100, to Arthur and his father. This capital was designated to establish a brewery. This detail is important because it shifts the narrative away from sudden brilliance and towards quiet, inherited opportunity. It was not a sudden invention, but the slow, methodical transfer of wealth and knowledge across generations. With this initial capital, Arthur began his first tentative steps into the brewing world, establishing a modest operation in Leixlip, a small town outside Dublin. This brewery was not a palace of industry. It was a rough collection of coppers, mash tuns, and wooden vessels, housed in a building designed for function, not fanfare. Here, Arthur spent his early years learning the stubborn secrets of yeast, the invisible living agent that transforms raw grain into stable liquid. He learned the rhythm of the fire beneath the copper, the patience required for the slow bubbling of the fermenting wort, and the crucial importance of temperature control in a world without thermometers.
The like-slip venture, while instructive, was not destined for greatness. It served its purpose as an apprenticeship in patience. But the true pivotal moment came when Arthur recognized the potential lay not in the quiet countryside, but in the chaotic, rapidly growing heart of the island, Dublin. The year was 1759. Dublin was a sprawling, bustling, soot-covered port city, the second largest in the British Empire. Amidst its chaotic docks and crowded, narrow streets stood an aging, mostly abandoned facility known as the St. James's Gate Brewery. The brewery itself had fallen into disuse, but its location, near clean water sources and with established access routes to the Liffey River, was strategically invaluable. This moment is the quiet axis upon which the entire history turns. It is not marked by a battle or a grand declaration, but by the slow, meticulous ritual of legal parchment. Picture the scene not as a triumph, but as a tedious afternoon in a notary's office. The air is still, lit by the quiet flicker of tallow candles. The only sounds are the scratching of the quill on thick, heavy paper, the rustle of the linen vestments of the lawyers, and the quiet clearing of a throat. Arthur Guinness, a quiet man of 34, sits patiently. He is not signing a deed of ownership, but a lease so astonishing in its foresight or its sheer confidence that it has become legendary. Arthur Guinness signed a lease for the St. James's Gate Brewery site for 9,000 years. The terms were simple: a fixed annual rent of £45. The duration, 9,000 years, is the detail that arrests the mind. 9 millennia of continuous obligation, a duration that stretches the limits of human imagination. Was this boldness? Or was it simply the serene, unwavering confidence of a meticulous man who believed absolutely in the durability of his craft? The moment of the signature is the quiet turning of a page in history. There is no fanfare, no prophetic declaration, just the soft scratch of the quill, the seal of hot wax cooling, and the sound of the parchment being slowly rolled up and tied with a length of thin twine. Arthur Guinness had secured a dusty plot of land and an old, dilapidated building. He hadn't conquered Dublin. He had merely committed to the stubborn rhythm of work for the next 9,000 years. The real work, the long, slow ferment of the Guinness legacy, was just about to begin in the damp silence of St. James's Gate.
The St. James's Gate Brewery of the late 18th century was not the sprawling, magnificent industrial complex we know today. It was, in its first decades under Arthur Guinness, a humble, damp, and somewhat chaotic collection of sheds and stone buildings, struggling to hold the machinery necessary for the great work of transformation. The atmosphere within these walls was defined by heat, steam, and a constant, pervasive smell. the heavy, nourishing scent of malted barley, and the sharp, invigorating tang of yeast. To understand the core of the Guinness operation is to understand the meaning of patience. Brewing, particularly in this era, was not a process of immediate action. It was a ritual of waiting. It relied entirely on the slow, unhurried processes of physics and biology. Arthur Guinness and his small team were primarily caretakers of time, overseeing processes they could influence but never truly rush. Let us walk slowly through the first great stage of brewing, the mash. The heart of the entire operation lies with the barley. Arthur's primary focus in these early days was securing a reliable supply of malted barley. Malting is itself a quiet, slow process. The controlled, deliberate germination of the barley grain halted abruptly by heat. This coaxes the starches within the grain to convert into simpler sugars, making them accessible to the yeast later on. The prepared malt, a rough, pale, crunchy grain, would be crushed or ground. Then came the mash. The crushed malt was mixed with copious amounts of hot water in a massive wooden vessel known as a mash tun. Picture this tun, enormous, circular and deep, made of thick, seasoned timber banded with iron hoops. The air above the tun was thick with rising steam, carrying the potent, sweet, earthy aroma of the steeping grain. The purpose of the mash was simple: to steep the barley like an immense, slow-brewed tea, allowing the newly converted sugars to dissolve into the hot water. This process was unhurried. It required the mixture, the mash, to stand for several hours, often stirred slowly and methodically with long wooden paddles by weary, steamy men. The temperature had to be carefully controlled, checked not by precise glass thermometers, but by the experienced touch of the brewmaster's hand on the copper, or the subtle change in the density of the rising steam. This moment was the great act of extraction, a slow conversion of the solid, raw potential of the barley into the sweet, golden liquid known as wort. The sound during the mash was a profound quiet, punctuated by the rhythmic, heavy slosh of the paddle against the thick, porridge-like mixture. This labor was not exciting. It was the stubborn rhythm of work, a necessity that defined the middle hours of the day. Once steeped, the sweet liquid, the wort, was slowly drained off the bottom of the mash tun, leaving behind the spent grain, which was often sold to local farmers as feed, a beautiful example of the complete zero-waste economy of the era. The wort then proceeded to the copper. The copper was the largest, most formidable piece of equipment in the early brewery, a massive vessel shaped like a bell, heated directly by a furnace of coal or peat below. The wort was brought to a violent, rolling boil. This stage served multiple purposes. It ensured the liquid was sterilized and free from any residual bacteria from the grain or the environment, and it was the moment when hops were introduced. Hops, a climbing vine producing small green, pungent flowers, were vital. They served two functions. They provided a stabilizing preservative that allowed the beer to last longer, crucial for future transport, and they contributed the essential bitterness that counteracted the cloying sweetness of the malted sugars. The aroma during the boil was intoxicating. The heavy, sweet malt smell was cut through by the sharp, herbal, almost floral scent of the boiling hops.
The copper was a place of roaring heat and constant steam. The light in that section of the brewery was often obscured by the clouds of vapor, creating a perpetually hazy, humid atmosphere. The sound was dominated by the low, continuous rumble of the fire and the frantic, heavy bubbling of the copper, the loudest, most forceful moment in the entire brewing sequence. Here, the brewer's focus was absolute, ensuring the boil was maintained for the precise amount of time necessary to fully extract the hop's bitterness and aromatic oils. Once boiled, the wort was carefully, laboriously cooled. This step was arguably the most vulnerable point in the entire process. The hot liquid had to be reduced in temperature quickly and cleanly, often by running it over broad, shallow trays or coils, exposed to the ambient cool air of the Dublin environment. If the cooling was too slow, the wort would remain in a danger zone of temperature, inviting bacteria to contaminate the brew, ruining the entire batch and wasting immense effort and expense. Speed and cleanliness were absolute necessities, a quiet technical challenge in an age before modern refrigeration. Finally, the cooled wort was ready for the moment of biological magic. Fermentation. This was the great act of faith. The liquid was transferred to large wooden vats, and the yeast was introduced. Yeast, that single-celled, invisible fungus, was the ultimate engine of the Guinness business. It was the agent that would silently, methodically consume the malt sugars and produce two essential byproducts: alcohol and carbon dioxide. The fermentation room was the quietest, most mysterious part of the brewery. The atmosphere was cool, damp, and heavy with the dense, slightly fruity, yeasty smell of active biological process. The sound was not mechanical, but organic, the gentle, steady hiss and burble of the yeast working its change, a sound like a quiet, continuous sigh rising from the massive vats. This sound, the quiet song of the yeast, was the sound of the future being created. Arthur Guinness, like all master brewers, relied entirely on his house yeast, a unique, locally adapted strain that provided the defining characteristics of his finished product. This yeast was guarded with religious reverence, harvested from the top of the fermenting brew, stored carefully, and repitched into the next batch. It was the living, biological signature of St. James' Gate. The process of fermentation took days, sometimes weeks, and required the utmost patience. The brewers could only watch, waiting for the dense krausen, the thick head of foam created by the escaping carbon dioxide, to rise and fall, marking the slow, inevitable exhaustion of the sugar. This was the period of absolute trust in time and biology, the long ferment that gave the brewery its fundamental rhythm. Only when the yeast had completed its work was the liquid officially considered beer, ready to be racked into the massive wooden barrels that would define the final stage of maturation and distribution. The entirety of the early years at St. James' Gate was defined by this slow, laborious, repetitive cycle. Barrels were rolled by hand, heavy scoops of malt were lifted by human muscle, and the fires beneath the coppers were stoked with endless vigilance. It was the stubborn rhythm of work, a continuous, exhausting cycle of mashing, boiling, cooling, and waiting. There was no grandeur, only the absolute necessity of diligence and faith, that the slow, invisible process of fermentation would yield a stable, safe, and satisfying liquid for the thirsty city outside the gate. Arthur Guinness was not a corporate innovator yet. He was simply a very patient man, committed to repeating the same slow, honest work day after damp day.
Stepping outside the thick stone walls of St. James's Gate is to step from the disciplined heat of industry into the raw, damp, chaotic energy of Dublin itself. The world around the brewery was a constant, restless scene of commerce, poverty, and profound, quiet human endurance. This outside world was the market, the reason for the continuous work inside, and the harsh reality that gave the finished product its deepest meaning. The brewery's immediate neighborhood was a dense tapestry of workers' cottages, small tradesmen's shops, and taverns. It was a compact, highly functional environment where the life of the factory bled seamlessly into the domestic sphere. The air here was not just dominated by the aroma of brewing malt. It was a complex layering of smells. The damp wool of coats, the ever-present scent of peat smoke from low chimneys, the acrid bite of coal dust, and the earthy, rich aroma rising from the Liffey River nearby. The Liffey River was the city's lifeblood, and it was crucial to the brewery. It was the great, slow artery for transport and trade. Picture the sight. Heavy wooden barges being slowly towed, their ropes straining against the current, carrying sacks of barley upstream, or taking full, heavy barrels of beer downstream toward the docks and the sea. The riverbanks themselves were a constant scene of laborious activity. Dockers in thick, rough cloth maneuvering heavy crates, the shouts of the tallyman, and the pervasive creaking of timber, the sound of ships and carts enduring great loads. The auditory environment of Dublin was a continuous symphony of industry and simple daily life, a soundscape that never truly fell silent, even during the deepest hours of the night. It was defined by hoofbeats and wheels, the rhythmic clop, clop, clop of horses pulling heavy drays, the massive, sturdy carts used to transport barrels, the iron-rimmed wheels grinding against the cobblestone streets created a high, persistent rattle, a noise synonymous with movement and commerce. The barrel roll, the sound of the finished product being moved, a rolling barrel, heavy with finished stout, created a unique, hollow, resonant rumble and thud as it was guided by tired, strong hands into the cellar or onto the waiting cart. This sound, more than any other, was the sound of the brewery interacting with the street. The taverns, the sounds of the local alehouses were low and comforting. The clatter of pewter tankards on thick wooden bars, the muffled, tired laughter of men and women after a long day of labor, and the simple, repetitive thump of a fist on a table demanding another round. This beer, this dark, slowly brewed liquid, was more than just a drink in this challenging environment. It was a gentle, reliable constant amidst profound, unpredictable hardship. The 19th century in Dublin was marked by immense poverty, political unrest, and deep social anxiety. For the laborer, the docker, the mason, the weaver, life was a continuous struggle for stability. In this world of scarcity, Guinness Stout came to be known quietly as liquid bread. This phrase captured the profound nutritional reality of the drink. Unlike spirits, whiskey
which offered immediate, volatile intoxication. Stout offered calories, complex carbohydrates, and stability. It was heavy, dark, and filling. For a man who might have missed a meal, or whose day involved 7 or 8 hours of continuous manual labor, a pint of the stout was a practical, immediate source of energy. It was a caloric deposit that fortified the body against the pervasive cold and the gnawing hunger. The dense, opaque color was visual confirmation of its substance, its richness drawn directly from the simple, slow process of the mashed barley. The consumption of this beer was also a necessary social ritual. After the long, punishing silence of the factory or the docks, the tavern was the place of release, the single, warm, safe, candlelit space where community could be rebuilt, where shared hardship could be momentarily eased by the slow, comforting warmth of the drink. The glass of stout was held, slowly savored, its creamy head a brief, perfect moment of visual luxury before it dissipated. Arthur Guinness's genius in this early era lay not in innovation, but in consistency and quality. While many small, local brewers produced weak, often highly variable ales, Guinness focused, with stubborn Protestant discipline, on producing a stout that was dependably strong, dependably dark, and dependably consistent. This consistency was a profound source of trust in a world where nothing else was dependable. The laborer knew with absolute certainty that when he spent his few precious coins on a pint of Guinness, he would receive the exact, specific caloric and social return he expected. This quiet reliability was the foundation of the brand's loyalty, built glass by slow glass over decades of hardship. The focus always remained on the people and the persistent rhythm of their survival. The stout was the dark, flowing mirror of the city itself, resilient, strong, a little bitter, and ultimately enduring. The brewery's success was not a sudden explosion. It was the slow, inevitable result of its products being woven into the very fabric of daily necessity, the quiet constant that buffered the sharp edges of life in the soot-covered, damp, and ever-moving city of Dublin.
With Arthur Guinness's own long life drawing to a close at the start of the 19th century, the heavy work of the brewery was taken up by the next generation. The House of Guinness was never truly about a single charismatic figure. It was, above all else, about family duty and the quiet, inherited Protestant work ethic, a relentless, methodical discipline applied to the slow process of brewing and logistics. The succeeding generations, Arthur's son, Arthur Guinness II, and his grandson, Sir Benjamin Lee Guinness, took the reins not with revolutionary fervor, but with a deep, solemn commitment to the continuity of the rhythm established in the first decades. Their ambition was not loud. It was expressed in the meticulous maintenance of the copper coppers, the careful guarding of the yeast strain, and the slow, strategic expansion of the stone buildings at St. James's Gate. In the early decades of the 1800s, the focus shifted from merely serving Dublin to serving the Empire. The great challenge of this era was not brewing itself, but logistics. The immensely complicated task of moving a heavy, perishable liquid product across vast, difficult distances while maintaining its integrity and flavor.
Picture the slow, laborious effort required to prepare the stout for its voyage. The final product was not simply poured into a barrel and shipped. It had to be brewed specifically for endurance, often slightly stronger, with a higher hop content, which acted as a natural preservative. The barrels themselves were vital. They had to be perfectly seasoned oak, absolutely watertight, and lined with pitch to prevent the wood from tainting the delicate flavor of the stout. The coopers, the men who crafted these vessels, were artisans of critical importance, their work judged by its silent ability to protect its precious cargo across thousands of miles. The sound of their work, the rhythmic, sharp tap-tap-tap of the hammer driving iron hoops onto wooden staves, was a constant feature of the brewery yard, a sound of preparation for a long, silent journey. The beer's journey began with the laborious process of loading. The heavy, full barrels, weighing hundreds of pounds each, had to be rolled down ramps, secured onto the drays, and transported through the cobblestone chaos of Dublin to the docks of the Liffey. This was a scene of tremendous slow-motion effort, the straining of horses, the shouting of drivers, the groaning of the carts under the enormous, dense weight of the liquid. From the docks, the beer was slowly loaded onto sailing ships bound first to Bristol or Liverpool, and later for the distant reaches of the British Empire. This journey itself was a phase of uncontrolled maturation. Tossed by the unpredictable motion of the sea, subjected to changing temperatures and the damp, salty air of the ship's hold, the stout continued its slow, quiet transformation. It was a gamble on time, weather, and the resilience of the oak barrel. The first major expansion was the establishment of a steady presence in London. London was not just a market, it was the nerve center of global commerce. Establishing a solid, dependable supply chain there was a logistical triumph. The stout had to arrive consistently, in perfect condition, ready to compete with the vast array of local English porters and ales. This success was built on the reliability of the shipment, the promise that the beer ordered would be the beer delivered, on time, and with its dark, distinctive flavor intact.
As the 19th century progressed, the Guinness family began to look further, to Australia, to the Caribbean, to West Africa. These were immense logistical undertakings that required a patience measured not in days, but in months of slow, continuous waiting. The ships carrying the stout would spend weeks or months at sea, creaking through the long oceanic stretches. The entire process was recorded not with drama, but with the monotonous fidelity of the ledger book. Imagine the quiet, cool atmosphere of the Guinness counting house. Here the work was silent, illuminated by the steady light from tall, arched windows. The only sounds were the turning of ledger pages, the faint, repetitive scratch of the pen, and the soft, measured breathing of the clerks. Success was quantified in the slow, steady accumulation of figures, the tonnage shipped, the tariffs paid, the profit margins sustained across vast, unstable distances. The ambition of the second and third generations was expressed through infrastructure and stability. Sir Benjamin Lee Guinness, in particular, was the great consolidator. He bought the lands surrounding St. James's Gate, systematically transforming the collection of modest buildings into a true integrated industrial city. The brewery built its own rail lines to connect directly to the docks. It built massive storage vats to ensure continuity of supply, and it invested heavily in new steam-powered pumps and boilers to manage the vast volume of liquid. Yet even this immense industrialization was narrated by the family with a tone of quiet inevitability, not boastful innovation. The introduction of the steam engine was not celebrated as a leap forward, but as a necessary step to maintain the consistency of the brew across greater volumes. The new machinery was simply a more efficient way to perform the same patient, repetitive task Arthur had begun by hand: mashing, boiling, cooling, and waiting. The Protestant work ethic was the silent internal driver of this empire. It taught that diligence was its own reward, that waste was a sin, and that the quality of the work reflected the quality of the man. This deep, ingrained discipline was transferred to the workers, creating a workforce known for its loyalty and methodical precision. The success of the stout abroad was a direct reflection of the quiet, stable routine maintained within the walls of St. James's Gate, a rhythm that endured the chaos of war, famine, and political upheaval outside its gates. The expansion of the House of Guinness, viewed through this lens, was not a story of conquest, but of slow, unhurried persistence. It was the story of hundreds of thousands of oak barrels rolling slowly across cobblestones, creaking on decks, and finally arriving intact on distant, humid shores. A testament to the enduring power of family duty and the quiet faith in a simple, dark liquid brewed with patience, stability, and time.
Having established the continuity of work and the stability of the supply chain, the Guinness enterprise next faced the quiet, almost subconscious task of establishing a visual and textural identity, the subtle characteristics that would set the stout apart from every other dark beer in the vast marketplace. This process was not a sudden marketing campaign. It was the slow, inevitable result of consistent quality and the inherent, unique properties of the brew itself. The first and most defining characteristic of the Guinness product is its color. It is not black in the harsh, absolute sense of a sudden absence of light. It is a profound, deep, rich ruby black, visible only when held up to a strong, steady light source. This color is achieved through a specific, painstaking process, the use of a small percentage of roasted, unmalted barley. Picture the dedicated section of the brewery where this roasting takes place. The air here is distinct, thicker, warmer, carrying the potent, intense smell of charred grain, a scent that speaks of high heat and controlled caramelization. The raw barley, having never been allowed to germinate, is subjected to a fiery, rapid roasting process, similar to the method used for coffee beans. This process converts the starches directly into a dark, complex pigment and imparts the stout with its signature, dry, slightly bitter, cocoa-like flavor. The color, this dark, rich hue, became a subconscious symbol of density and substance for the consumer. In a world where many ales were pale and thin, the deep, opaque color of Guinness promised calories, richness, and fortification. It was the visual confirmation of the moniker liquid bread we discussed earlier. The depth of the black suggested a corresponding depth of flavor, a heavy richness that promised to settle the stomach and fortify the limbs against the Dublin damp. The color itself was a silent, powerful advertisement for reliability
and strength. Next, we turn to the magnificent ephemeral characteristic that became the stout's ultimate signature, the creamy head. The head of the Guinness Stout is a masterpiece of quiet, technical control. It is not the coarse, rapidly dissipating foam of a naturally carbonated beer. It is a dense, smooth, creamy white color, a stark, beautiful contrast against the dark body below. This effect was achieved through a subtle, crucial innovation in dispense, the use of nitrogen gas rather than the customary carbon dioxide for pressurization. The nitrogen bubbles, being much smaller than carbon dioxide bubbles, create a finer, more stable texture. When the stout is poured, a process that must be slow, patient, and deliberate, the nitrogen cascades, forming a mesmerizing turbulent surge within the glass, before settling slowly, inexorably, into the perfect domed cap of cream. Observe the quiet ritual of the pour, a moment of profound, simple drama. The glass is held at an angle, the liquid is poured rapidly, filling the glass to about 3/4. Then the process stops. The glass is set down firmly, and the slow, internal magic begins. The liquid shifts. The white bubbles appear to drop and fold into the dark mass, creating a dense, continuous cascade effect. This moment of settling is a moment of necessary patience, a few deliberate seconds where the drinker is forced to pause, to watch, and to wait for the drink to declare its perfect form. The final product, with its perfect clean division between the black body and the cream cap, is a visual argument for precision and care.
This creamy head became the stout's textural signature. It provided a soft, slightly sweet initial sensation that contrasted with the dry bitterness of the dark liquid beneath. It was the crowning visual element, elevating the common stout into something quietly, consistently beautiful. A small, perfect piece of artistry provided with every serving. Beyond the sensory elements, the family began the slow, quiet process of establishing a symbolic identity. In the era before mass advertising, the identity of a product was carried by its physical markers, the labels, the barrel stenciling, and the consistency of the trade cards. The Guinness family settled, early and with quiet determination, upon a symbol that would come to represent not just the beer, but Ireland itself: the harp. The harp is the ancient, recognized symbol of Ireland. By adopting the Brian Boru harp, a specific design rooted in the country's history, the Guinness Company subtly, persistently connected their product to the national consciousness. This was not a loud claim of ownership, but a quiet, visual association printed consistently on every bottle, crate, and ledger. This quiet association worked slowly, diligently over the decades, ensuring that the dark stout and the emblem of the harp became visually inseparable in the global mind. The other crucial component of this early, quiet branding was the trademark and label. The iconic black and cream color scheme that defined the packaging and the marketing materials was another subtle, effective tool. It was high contrast, instantly recognizable, and echoed the actual sensory experience of the poured pint. The visual language was one of stability and tradition, resisting the transient fads of the marketplace. The quiet, enduring success of this branding was that it was built entirely on consistency, not invention. Arthur's successors were not trying to invent a feeling. They were trying to perfect a delivery system for an existing,
high-quality experience. Every glass of stout poured, whether in a dusty corner of Dublin or on a humid dock in the Caribbean, was an exact, precise replication of the previous one. This unwavering uniformity of color, texture, and taste, achieved through meticulous, persistent control over the roasting, the fermentation, and the dispense, was the true genius of the brand. The narrators of this success story, the sons and grandsons of Arthur Guinness, were pragmatic industrialists, not poets. Yet through their relentless focus on the black and the cream, they created a powerful, sensory poetry. The Guinness pint became a slow-moving portrait of patience and perfection, a quiet, reassuring emblem of endurance and stability in a changing, turbulent world. They were simply brewing for the next day, but in doing so, they created a permanent, quiet fixture in the landscape of global culture.
As the House of Guinness grew beyond a simple brewery and solidified its status as a massive industrial institution, the nature of its success began to change. The focus moved from mere accumulation to the quiet, complex obligation of legacy. For the Guinness family, adherence to the Protestant work ethic meant that success carried an implicit, profound responsibility, an immediate duty to the city that had enabled their continuous prosperity. The weight of this legacy was expressed not in the vastness of the enterprise, but in the slow, meticulous application of philanthropy and civic improvement. The family's approach to wealth distribution was often marked by the same methodical, long-term patience they applied to brewing. They were not known for ostentatious, flashy donations, but for sustained, structural investments in the welfare and health of their community, particularly in the poor and crowded areas surrounding St. James's Gate. Their aim was to provide stability, to create a buffer against the pervasive poverty and disease that plagued 19th century Dublin. The most visible and enduring examples of this legacy were in housing and health. In the later 19th and early 20th centuries, Dublin suffered immense overcrowding and appalling sanitation, conditions that bred chronic illness and social despair. The Guinness family took on the slow, expensive, and unglamorous task of addressing this structural failing. They invested heavily in model housing projects, clean, sturdy, brick-built homes designed for the working classes. Picture these homes, simple, practical, and a profound contrast to the fetid tenements that defined much of the inner city. They featured proper sanitation, access to clean water, a luxury in this era, and open shared courtyards that allowed light and air to circulate, all meticulously managed details that spoke volumes about the family's disciplined approach to societal problems. The construction was not rushed. It was slow, steady, and built to last, mirroring the 9,000-year commitment of the original lease. The sound of the bricklayer's trowels and the patient, careful setting of the foundations was the quiet, ongoing sound of the Guinness family reinvesting in the fundamental structure of the city. Similarly, their commitment to public health was massive and structural. They were primary benefactors for numerous Dublin hospitals, often funding entire wards, purchasing vital new equipment, or establishing institutions dedicated to specific needs. This was an acknowledgement that the health of the workforce was the health of the business.
but it was executed with a quiet, generational dedication that extended far beyond self-interest. The slow, rhythmic cleaning of hospital floors, the quiet efficiency of the nurses, and the steady, low light of the night wards were all indirectly sustained by the deep, dark wealth flowing out of St. James's Gate. Crucially, the House of Guinness developed an unparalleled reputation for loyalty and discipline within its own workforce. Being employed at the brewery was a coveted position, often referred to as a job for life. The employment was stable, the wages were fair for the era, and the company offered benefits that were utterly revolutionary for the time. Pensions, subsidized meals, medical facilities, and even assistance with housing. This relationship fostered generational loyalty. It was a common story within Dublin for sons to follow fathers and grandsons to follow sons into the service of the brewery. The workers themselves became a quiet, enduring symbol of the company's stability. Their expertise accumulated over decades of performing the same slow, patient tasks: the gauging of the copper, the tending of the mash, the art of the tight cooperage was the true, irreplaceable wealth of the business.
Imagine the atmosphere in the brewery mess hall during the midday break. The low murmur of men eating their subsidized warm meal, the shared language of the craft, the quiet confidence born from guaranteed steady employment. This was the town's heartbeat, the engine of stability running silently in the background of a frequently turbulent political scene. The company demanded high standards of conduct and sobriety from its workforce, but it repaid that discipline with a commitment that lasted across entire human lifetimes. The weight of legacy also meant navigating the treacherous political waters of Ireland in the 19th and 20th centuries. The Guinness family, as established members of the Anglo-Irish Protestant ascendancy, maintained a complex relationship with the predominantly Catholic city they employed and endowed. Their enduring success relied on a careful, quiet neutrality, a focus on the steady, non-sectarian business of brewing, and the necessary non-sectarian work of charity. The family's success became a quiet, unavoidable feature of the Irish global identity, largely succeeding in separating the product, the dark, dependable stout, from the potentially divisive politics of its owners. The pint of Guinness became a unifying symbol, a quiet constant that transcended the often bitter divisions of the era. As the company grew into a vast, publicly traded institution, the founding family's direct, paternal influence slowly receded, but the philosophical footprint remained. The reputation for quality, the commitment to civic duty, and the deep, persistent connection between the factory gates and the homes of the workers, these elements were brewed into the culture of the House of Guinness as surely as the dark color was brewed into the stout. The contemplation of this legacy is a meditation on how a business can transcend mere commerce and become a socio-economic foundation. It is a recognition of the profound, quiet power of sustained, consistent effort, both in the slow fermentation of the stout and in the methodical, patient commitment to the well-being of a community. The entire city of Dublin was, in a quiet, undeniable way, drinking from the same deep well of stability provided by the persistent rhythm of St. James's Gate.
We arrive now at the conclusion of our long, slow journey. 2 centuries have passed since Arthur Guinness signed his famous lease under the faint flicker of candlelight. The modest sheds have grown into a massive industrial complex, and the local Dublin stout has traveled to every corner of the globe. Yet despite the technological changes, the fundamental rhythm of the brewery, the patient process of mashing, boiling, and waiting continues at St. James's Gate. The true legacy of Guinness is not measured in balance sheets or market share. It is measured in the continuity of sensory experience. It is the simple, powerful act of the quiet pour, a ritual performed millions of times a day, connecting the drinker in the present to the same essential liquid Arthur first perfected in the 1760s. Let us stand for a final moment in the modern St. James Gate complex. It is now a place where tourism and technology intersect. But if you listen past the sound of the guides and the tapping of the ticket kiosks, you can still perceive the ghosts of the old work. You can still hear the vast, slow pumping of water, the essential, life-giving element that starts every batch. You can still catch the powerful, nourishing aroma rising from the mash tuns, the heady, sweet scent of malted barley, precisely the same fundamental smell that enveloped Arthur in his small copper house. The brewery is still breathing, a massive, complex lung of steam, heat, and liquid, adhering to the same principles of extraction and patience. The quiet culmination of this entire history of the labor, the logistics, the philanthropy, and the sensory refinement is found in the final perfect moment when the stout meets the glass. This is where the black and the cream make their final public declaration of quality. Picture the perfect, slow, deliberate technique of the bartender, a quiet homage to the centuries of patience required to create the liquid. The 2-part pour is not a show, it is a technical necessity, ensuring the nitrogen bubbles settle correctly to form the tight, creamy head. The glass is held firmly, the tap is pulled quickly, and the cascade begins. Observe the cascade. The rich, dark liquid appears to fall and swirl against itself, the tiny nitrogen bubbles moving downward, pulling the density toward the base. This process forces the gas to stabilize, resulting in the formation of the dense, domed cap. This moment, the quiet pause as the pint settles, is the final required act of patience demanded by the liquid itself. It is the last instance where the drinker must wait, forced to appreciate the artistry before consumption. The head, when fully settled, is clean, defined, and stable, a perfect snow-white collar against the impenetrable ruby-black body. The sound is minimal now, a gentle, faint hiss of gas escaping the dense foam, the sound of the liquid achieving its ideal temporary state of equilibrium. When the glass is finally raised, the drinker is engaging in a sensory ritual that has barely changed in 200 years. The scent is dominant, a complex, dry aroma of roasted barley, faint chocolate, and a touch of hop bitterness. The first sip is defined by the creamy, cold texture of the head, followed immediately by the dry, crisp, and slightly bitter character of the dark body. It is a taste of profound, quiet stability,
a flavor that feels reliable, historic, and entirely consistent with every other Guinness pint ever poured. The entire history of the House of Guinness is contained in that single dark glass. The poverty of 18th century water is solved by the boiling of the copper. The patience of the early generations is reflected in the slow setting of the cascade. The precision of the family's industrial discipline is expressed in the perfect texture of the creamy head. The endurance of the Irish people is mirrored in the heavy, sustaining richness of the liquid bread. This continuity is a powerful, reassuring concept. The chaotic world outside the brewery walls changes constantly, politically, socially, technologically, yet the essential dark liquid remains the same, an anchor to the stability and quiet persistence of the past. The commitment signed on that piece of 9,000-year parchment, witnessed in candlelight, is honored with every perfectly poured glass. The ultimate takeaway from this long, slow history is the recognition of quiet power. The most influential enterprises are often not those built on sudden leaps of genius or loud marketing, but on the relentless, monotonous perfection of a simple, repetitive process. Arthur Guinness's legacy is the quiet affirmation that diligence, consistency, and time are the most powerful forces in history. He built not an empire of conquest, but an empire of reliable, sustaining comfort, a dark, comforting liquid that promised and delivered exactly what was expected every single time. As you now drift into quiet rest, allow the subtle sounds of the distant brewery, the slow slosh of the mash, the gentle hiss of the fermentation, the quiet settling of the foam, to become part of your own stillness. You have witnessed the long, slow turn of the wheel. The great industry continues its quiet rhythm, older than memory, steady as time. The history has settled. The glass is empty. And if you listen long enough, you can still hear the brewery breathe, slow, steady, and older than memory. Sleep now.